You're okay, you don't get... Good morning again. We're going to begin our late morning, afternoon session. I want to introduce Bob McCarty. His little bio is in our program, but just a little bit that how I came to know Bob. Bob was the executive director for the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry, that long title, right, Bob? The NFCYM, that's everyone with the acronyms, for a while. 19 years, Bob was and I knew him before I came into ministry in the diocese. And he's been doing many workshops, Zooming over this past year or so, and going to national conferences and speaking to people about ministry. But today he's going to talk to us about hope. And I hope you'll be interactive, so we'll see how that goes with everything. So welcome, Bob McCarty, for us.
Very nice of you. Yeah, I always think it's funny when people applaud before they heard anything. I always think like, all right, so what's going on? Are you really like polite or are you really optimistic? And either way, I'm good with that. I'm really good. I have to tell you, I'm so happy to be in the flesh. These last 18 months have just been a disaster. The plus side was I only had to dress from the waist up, so thank God nobody on the Zoom ever said stand up. That would have been really embarrassing. But it's true. To be able to gather again like this is just incredible. I mean, I feel like a bit like I'm going to channel Father Bob's comments this morning because I think it fits so well with what I'd like to be able to talk about with you. But I want to say first I want to congratulate the diocese on this whole concept. That normally this would be a skills day. This is not a ministry skills day. This is a ministry spirit day. Very different. Very appropriate given all the chaos that we've experienced over the last 18 months. My professional career has always been in the church. I've worked for the church at every level, from parish, school, diocese, the national level. Now I do consulting with national organizations and I teach at a couple of universities around youth ministry, around youth in the church. That's my primary focus has been around youth and young adults in the church. And you saw in the bio, my most recent work is around why are they walking away? The whole study going, gone, disaffiliation, what is happening with our young adults in the church. And I do want to say at the beginning here, and I think this is all going to fit for today, I maintain we don't have a youth issue. We have a faith community challenge. It's really important to think about all these issues in terms of how does the community today pass on faith? How do we pass on faith in a secular world? And so what I want to be able to talk about is us and how this fits in. But here's how I want to begin. I want to give you an image to frame the day. And it is the image of chaos. My favorite translation in Scripture of the Genesis story, it's an old Protestant translation. And it says that God creates out of the chaos. Out of the chaos, God created. I've come to believe that the Spirit is more present in chaos than in structure, than in order, than in bureaucracy. That in the chaos, the Spirit is trying to create something new. That within any chaos, whether it's COVID, hurricanes, wildfires, refugee issues, racism, within any chaos, somewhere in there is the seeds of new creation. And the challenge today for pastoral leaders is how do we discern what the Spirit is telling us in the chaos? So today, we're going to look about, well, how do we, in the midst of the chaos, how do we maintain a sense of hope? What does that look like for us? I think that's critical. What is the Spirit telling us in the chaos? So I want to frame it this way. I have 3 objectives because I'm partially Jesuit trained, and I have to do everything in threes. I can't help myself. There's three things I'd like to be able to do with us today, and I think it flows pretty well. Our first half hour together, as I present, I want to talk about us as the messengers who bring hope. The second part, I want to talk about we as a community that proclaims hope. And then the last part, I would like to tie that all together and say, so where does our hope come from? And I'm going to maintain It comes from our scriptural image, the gospel image of the reign of God. That is the reign of God image that Jesus proclaims, that Jesus institutes. That's where hope comes from. So that's kind of the flow. And you saw on the schedule, after each of the sessions, those first two, we will take time at your table to talk a little bit about what's going on and what we're talking about here. So this will be, I think today could be more fun than you can stand, really. I think that's what we're going to try to do. So to begin, here's, what's it mean to be a messenger who brings hope? This is about us, and I'm going to start with this. I think that what this is about seeing. It's about seeing. One of the things I've learned in all my studies, in every spiritual tradition, two of the most profound practices that you find across the spectrum is the ability to stop and the ability to see. Those two faith practices are characteristic of every spiritual tradition. We already stopped this morning, and we will stop this afternoon to bring our day to a close. And in our culture, stopping, and in church language we call that Sabbath. Because Sabbath isn't just a day of the week, it's an attitude towards time. To learn how to stop, but I'm going to propose this morning, we have to learn how to see. And what does that mean? So I want to go back to Bonaventure, St. Bonaventure, and here's what he proposed. He said we have three sets of eyes. He said, certainly we have eyes of the flesh. And eyes of the flesh enable us, obviously, to see the world, take in sights and sounds, and to be able to see things. And I just came back late Tuesday night from Moab, Utah, where I spent 8 days exploring Canyonlands and Arches National Park. And I have to tell you, you talk about seeing and just being overwhelmed by nature. I mean, it was just terrific. But Bonaventure says that's only the first set of eyes. And in fact, if our eyes don't work as well as they're supposed to, we can correct them. We have corrective lenses to do that. He says, but we also have the eye of the mind. The eye of the mind is our way of establishing meaning. It's how we learn things. We create connections between information that we've taken in. Okay, so we have the eye of the mind. But what he says is that we have a third set of eyes, and he calls it the eyes of the spirit, the eyes of the soul. That's the critical way that we look. This idea of the eye of the soul and what that means for us. Because what does the eye of the soul allow us to do? I'm going to maintain that the eye of the soul allows us to see the spirit at work. I sometimes feel frustrated and even saddened by folks whose image of the world is so narrow that they only see the chaos and the negative stuff that's happening. I think our Christian faith calls us to go beyond that. To be able, in the midst of that chaos, we have to be a messenger of hope. So in the midst of that chaos, how do we help people begin to see differently? How do we help people see the Spirit at work in the world? To see with the eye of the soul. That will be the task for us. So with that, wrong button. What are we looking for? This is one of the funniest things for me. How do you know? How do you know that the transcendent is out there? How do you know the Spirit is there? So I'm stealing this. I'm sorry, it's church work. I'm borrowing this. One of my favorite authors, he's a sociologist of religion named Peter Berger. And in his book, Sacred Canopy, he talks about these signals of the transcendent. But here's the setup. It's a story about a little fish. And the fish is in school because, that's what fish do. So the fish is in school, and this fish learns that fish need water if they're going to live. This little fish gets all excited. Fish need water if we're going to live. After school, the fish runs up to his other friends. I guess he doesn't. He swims up to his other friends and says, is it true? Is it true? We need water if we're going to live. Yeah, it's true. We need water if we want to live. The fish goes home and says to his mother, is it true that we need water in order to live? And the mother says, yes, it's true. We need water if we're going to live. But then she says, but don't worry. Water is what you live in. The transcendent is what we live in. We live in that experience of God. We live in the mystery. The mystery of God is not somewhere out there that we keep trying to get to. The mystery of God is here now. We live in the transcendent for those with eyes to see. We live in it. So Peter Berger says there's five signals of this. And he says the first signal for him, he calls it the propensity for order, that trying to make sense out of things. He says that even in science, trying to find unifying principles or universal principles underlying all of creation, that propensity to try to make sense, he says that's a sign that there's something more. I've come to believe that scientists today may be our modern mystics because of the questions they ask and how they keep pushing the boundaries to know more, that there's something else out there, that propensity for order. Now, one of the things I have learned is that clearly Peter Berger never saw my desk, but that's a different thing. But do you see, and in fact, this is almost sad to admit to you, I have a book called Quantum Theology, and the author took quantum physics, and it was looking at quantum physics, so kind of the study of the universe, through the lens of theology and spirituality. I have to tell you, I don't understand one paragraph in that book. So what I've done is I've gone through the book, I've made yellow marks in a bunch of places, I've dogged here, and I leave it on my desk, so when people look at it, they go, wow, he must be smart. Yeah, I have no idea what's in there. But Berger is telling us that propensity for order is a signal, it's a sign. The second one, I think this is us. He calls it an engagement in play. Now think about this. When we are playing, we measure time differently. Like right now, standard time, we would say, we're moving on 11 o'clock on September 25th. That's one way of measuring time. But think about how you do it when we're playing. We measure time in terms of fourth quarter, third inning, second act. Do you see how we measure time differently when we play? A couple years back, my wife and I had the blessing and the challenge of hiking to Mount Everest. We went to Nepal for a month, and we trekked to base camp at Mount Everest, 18,000 feet. We did not measure the day in terms of hours. We measured in terms of altitude. That's how we knew where we were in this whole trek, this whole experience. At what altitude are we now, going from 5,000 feet in Kathmandu to 18,000 feet at base camp? When we play, we measure time differently. Why? Because we're touching on something else. There's something more. And you know this from your children and your grandchildren. How many times have you thought to yourself, I could save a lot of money just by buying my kids the boxes, the wrapping paper, and the string? You know? I mean, why? Because of how they play. There's something about play, really, that touches the transcendent. There's something about that fosters our sense of wonder. The third one he talks about, and it fits with today's theme. He said a spirit of hope is a signal that there's something more. Hope is called a theological virtue, and I think it's the theological virtue that tells us that the future can work. Hope is the virtue that says the future can be grace-filled, that in the midst of the chaos, the future can be better. Now think of it. Think of it in our own lives. Think of the chaos of our lives, from broken relationships to broken dreams, maybe loss of jobs. Think of all the chaos we experience in our lives. Hope says there's something more. There's something else. There's something we can work towards, that the future can be positive. The future can work. My favorite quote around hope, you saw it in the program book, as the South American theologian. He says, hope is hearing the melody of the future. That's what he says. It's hearing the melody of the future, what's out there. And then he says, faith is dancing to it today. In Catholic theology, we talk about the kingdom realized, but not yet. Alves is capturing that idea. Hope is hearing the melody of the future, the reign of God. It can be better. And I so believe that it can be better, I choose by faith to live it today. I dance to the melody today. And here's what we would say. We would say, and by choosing to dance to it today, you are actually bringing the kingdom about. That's why the church talks about kingdom realized, but not yet. Hope is hearing the melody of the future. Faith is dancing to it today. And when friends of ours have babies, I try to find this plaque. It's a quote by Carl Sandburg, the American poet. And he said, a baby is God's opinion that the world should go on. I love that. I love that quote because it's a hopeful sign. This whole idea, I've had a long conversation with one of my favorite young adults. I was her confirmation sponsor as a kid. Now she's like 28 or 29. And she's struggling with the idea of bringing children into our world. She says, I have an ethical, spiritual, emotional, psychological challenge here. Why should I have children? Look at the world. And she can name all the chaos. And I said to her, Danielle, and this was really very recently, and I said, Danielle, who knows if the child you bring into the world doesn't become the one who solves these issues? I mean, we don't know that. We don't know. So this whole idea that even having children is a sign of hope, that there's something more out there. I find that particularly powerful. I find it very powerful to be able to even think that way. The fourth thing that he talks about, and tell me this isn't us. Berger says our outrage at evil is a sign that we think there's something more, something better out there, and evil gets in the way of that. Think of our reaction when you see some of those photos around immigrants and refugees, not just on the border of the U.S., but across the world. The images that we see of people who are living in deep poverty and hunger, the people who live in oppression. I mean, how many photos can we watch of Afghanistan and Syria, Yemen, the Sudan? How many photos or clips, video clips can we watch of racism here in the U.S. and around the world? How many? And don't you find yourself, if we can avoid being just overwhelmed and shutting down, do you ever find yourself just being angry about that? That outrage at evil, Berger says, is because we know there's something more. There's something else. There's something. How many times have you been frustrated by the whole pandemic thing? It's a sense that there's something more. We are not fatalists. We are not willing to give in. In fact, we are outraged. Why? Because we know there's something else. There's something better. There's something grace-filled. We're going to call it the reign of God. We'll get there. And then the fifth one. I love this one. Berger says having a sense of humor is a sign that there's something more. He says that humans are the only part of creation that can laugh. Now, think about that. That's kind of a grace. I mean, isn't it? And don't you think there's more funny things in this world than we really let on? I mean, how many times have you seen things you go, and you want to just burst out laughing, but you know, it's probably not polite to do that kind of thing. I fly a lot, and sometimes sitting on the seat and watching people get on, I go, are you kidding? Who dressed you this morning? I mean, really, did you have any sense at all that people might see you? And inside I'm laughing to myself, and I think that's a better choice than laughing out loud. But this whole idea, somebody once described laughter as internal jogging because it massages your organs. So there's something about that idea that we should probably laugh more. This whole idea of being able to laugh. That humor gives us perspective. And you may have seen this quote already, but you know, Pope Francis made a point. He says, the worst advertisement for Christianity is grumpy Christians. He said that. And, you know, this whole idea that we are called to be those messengers of hope. We are called to be those kind of joyful people. That's a critical part of what the gospel calls us to. But it's hard. It's hard to be a messenger of hope. I found this story just recently. I found this story, and here's what it's about. It says, There's a church in Austria that holds an annual celebration where the parishioners in the church, they walk from the church to a city park 1 mile away. As they walk, they chant with each step forward, faith, hope, love. 3 steps forward, faith, hope, love. And after each set of 3 steps forward, they chant pain, suffering, and take 2 steps back. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. For the entire mile to their destination, they take these steps. Faith, hope, love. 2 steps back. Pain, suffering. It goes on to say it's very difficult for those who are in the line of those journeyers, those walkers, to see any progress in their journey. The way forward is so slow. So what they do in the parish, the parishioners put some people up on the hill where they have a better view, where they have a better vision, a better perspective on the progress of the walkers. And the folks up on the hill cheer the others on. You're doing it. You're doing great. Keep going. You'll make it. Hang in there. You're looking good. The people up on the hill provide that kind of perspective, that kind of hope, that kind of support. You look really good. Just keep going. Just keep going. You're almost there. Faith, hope, love, pain, suffering. Messengers of hope need to be the people on the hill. We need to be the people on the hill for those people in our lives who maybe are struggling with all this. We are the people on the hill who say to our children, to our grandchildren, to our neighbors, to our friends, to people in our parishes. We need to be the people who say, you're doing great. Hang in there. Don't let this win. We're making progress. It's getting better. Grace wins here. That's what we are about. Messengers of hope are the people on the hill. But I want to be able to say about all that, though. I want to be able to say, at times, though, we don't see. Maybe we're going blind at times. Sometimes we can't see this presence of the Spirit in our lives. What's going on here that we don't see? And sometimes it's because we get caught. I'm going to come back to this image at the very end, but I think we are stuck between 2 dreams. We are stuck between the societal dream of consumerism, materialism, hedonism, individualism. We're caught between that dream and the Jesus dream that's in the Gospels. So what we do is that we find ourselves getting caught in the tension between competition and compassion. Those 2 values often. Now this is pretty fascinating. I read recently where when you look at every religious tradition, no matter what religion it is, one of the unifying principles in all those religions is the value, the virtue of compassion. I think it's fascinating what God is telling us through every faith. We're caught between the tension. We're caught between holding on. And tell me in COVID, this has been a challenge for us, to hold on to things versus letting go. How challenging that can be for us. This third one is very, very difficult for us, especially in the Western society, and I think especially in the United States. The emphasis on individualism versus community and the common good. I think this has been particularly highlighted throughout the COVID crisis. I really do. Robert Bell is a sociologist of religion. He wrote in 1980, he wrote a book called Habits of the Heart. And he said at that time, 1980, individualism is the original American sin. This emphasis on, this belief is that it's all about me, that I'm on my own, and my job is to make out of my life what I can make out of it. It's the rugged individual, as opposed to the rugged individual whose emphasis is on the individual's rights versus on part of a community that carries with it responsibilities. Do you see the tension there? That tension prevents us from seeing the presence of God. around us. We forget we're living in the water. The fourth one, life is hard. And so sometimes we have this hardness in our life. It hardens our heart. It prevents us from seeing. It prevents us from seeing out. As opposed to having a sense of wonder. To live our lives with eyes wide open in amazement at God's creation, at God's presence. And then the fifth one here. And tell me this isn't us. We are caught between doing and being. I think it's interesting that we're always referred to as human beings, but we're always about human doings. There's something about that, isn't there? And I have to say, as I get closer to, all right, I don't call it retirement, I call it recalibration. As I get closer to recalibrating, I find that my biggest joys are often doing nothing, especially when I'm doing nothing with my grandkids. I have 3 grandchildren. There's something about being present. There's something about sitting on the edge of that canyon in Canyonlands National Park. There's something about being, to really be conscious of God. There's something about sitting in adoration and just being as opposed to doing. And I know that's hard for us because we have families, we have responsibilities, we have things we have to do. I know that. Sometimes we got to find a way to just be. So, I want to provide that as a way of bringing the morning piece together here. I want to suggest this. We have to see differently. We have to begin to see differently. We got to begin to see with the eyes of the soul to see the presence of God around us. That we are immersed in that. All right? And so with that, here are these 5 characteristics, I think, then of the journey that fit for us. And I think dovetails with this morning's prayer. I really do. Here's the first one. Every one of our journeys will include the cross. There's no way around it. There is. It's a scriptural image. It's Jesus. Every part of our life. All of us have a sense of the cross. We all experience that pain and suffering that is 2 steps back. It's what we do. But here's the thing about suffering. Here's the thing about the cross. The way that suffering becomes redemptive is when it leads us into solidarity with others who suffer. If Jesus on the cross is only focused on him and his pain, we go nowhere. But Jesus looks beyond. He looks at forgiveness. The crucifixion is in solidarity with all people who suffer, which indeed is all of us. Our lives will always have an experience of the cross. But M. Scott Peck, who wrote the book, The Road Less Traveled, Scott Peck said, how is it, though, that sometimes those who suffer the most often seem the most joyful? See, there's something about suffering that stretches our heart and allows us to love more deeply. The cross is called to be redemptive. We all experience the desert. I almost wanted to type and make this the dessert. I thought that would be fun. But we all have moments of the desert, don't we? We have those dry moments. We have those moments when life doesn't seem meaningful.